Hi there, my name's Elliot. I'm the founder of Contrast, an e-commerce marketing agency in the UK. And today we're going to be talking about UX and SEO and ultimately how they come together and how you can benefit from this. I've got 7 points today to jump through and we can explain and how that you can think about this for your own site to improve it. So what we're going to be looking at here is ultimately what is UX and why you should care, to then thinking about how UX comes into your SEO strategy. Ultimately then from a search engine perspective, like how can they interpret this from what information we know, and then like 7 tips again, so people over robots, optimizing your content, optimizing the navigation, cleaning up the actual design itself, improving site speed, just a clear user path, and then obviously from a mobile perspective. And then again, ultimately, when you've got the combination of SEO working well and a decent UX, it's going to be a great recipe for success. So let's dive into this and ultimately first talk about what is UX and why should I care? UX is just a fancy way of saying user experience, and what we need to remember is not to forget this and interpret it as UI. So UI is user interface, is ultimately what they interact with. So the user experience is the flow, the journey, the layout of a website. And as we've alluded to here, as we can see, like UI is like the fonts, the colors, the actual design styles, probably more like the guidelines and brand guidelines and things around that. Anything in more, I would probably say class this is more like more modern practices these days, like having a great UX is only going to be essential for having a great performing website, whether that's from a conversion rate or from an SEO point of view. It's all encompassing these days, and everything has overlap from a performance perspective, and it all kind of comes together to help improve how you perform online. If we looked at like hard-coded websites back from like the early 2000s that just like using tables, I think the easiest probably way of saying this from a non-designer perspective, they don't look pretty. And again, like those aren't going to build up trust with customers, so they're probably not going to convert, so you're not going to get sales. And then again, essentially, because you're probably going to have a high bounce rates and other behavioral signals, this is then ultimately going to then send signals towards the search engines that the site isn't going to again perform, and probably from an SEO perspective shouldn't be ranking you as well. That's just the opposite as an example, but that's ultimately why you should care. Again, it all comes back down to this bottom impact of helping increase performance, and performance helps with sales and moves the needle. So again, here we're going to talk about combining UX and SEO. How does this come together? And alluding to this, that search engines want to provide the best search results. This also, though, doesn't necessarily mean it is the best answer. And that's something we do actually have to bear in mind, that somebody could have wrote a much better answer, but again, like we've used the example of a really outdated, hard-coded, probably table-style website, that's not going to have the best user experience, but for argument's sake, a more modern website is going to have a much better user experience. If those two are competing against each other, I would probably place a bet that the new, more modern site is also going to outrank if every other factor is the same. Not that'll be hard to kind of replicate. But like you say, if this is the case that Google wants to give the best answer in a quick fashion, we want to make it as easy for the user to get that information for them. So again, like we see these days featured snippets, just having that table contents as well, sometimes like just a small excerpt that they can pull this information from. But again, like we've seen more recently, again, there's case studies out there of showing sites that have had negative impacts from UX not being updated, when we've seen Google roll out updates around like mobile friendliness, or again, we see in Google Search Console these days that you sometimes get notifications around actual like design elements, basically saying sometimes, oh, this content doesn't have this button doesn't have a good enough ratio for people being able to interpret it, or content's wider than a certain element. All these things kind of come together to have a negative impact on your UX and the performance that can then have from an SEO perspective. So essentially, we're kind of talking about these as high level things, but like how does Google actually know about if your site has a good UX, or is then able to attribute these kind of things to in giving you a better performance? So nobody knows the exact answers, but these are just some of the factors that we believe it kind of comes down to. Just things like straight up site speed, that will be a contributing factor to the overall. Again, like we're on responsive sites just as a mainstream thing now, and how then we've alluded to obviously GSC giving notifications to some elements and things like that. That's again one way that you can have a contributing factor to that. That obviously we need the site to load fast on mobile as well as desktop. And then we've got those ability of responsive sites. And then the actual content structure, when we go load onto it, are we just seeing one massive hero element that's covering up the whole page? That's probably not going to be great for a customer. They probably want to be able to see more above the fold. Just making sure that it's clear. Again, like if it's a blog post, that we don't have a massive image when the site loads, probably just going straight into content is going to be a better thing. Just from a normal SEO perspective, has that page got a lot of referring backlinks, and are they from authoritative resources? Not confirmed, but from my own personal perspective, I definitely think like behavioral patterns around like how we see like bounce rates and time on site and things like that will be in some attributing factor to how all of these things. I don't think they're direct signals, but I think they could be indirectly attributing towards this. Obviously with those kind of signals and the rest of the contributing factors to this, that if we've got all of them and it's slow, it's not mobile responsive, it has like one massive large home screen hero element, it doesn't have any links, and it's got messages in GSC that certain elements are not great for on different experiences, and so on and so forth. Like all of these things is, why is Google or other search engines going to want to rank your site above others? Like you're obviously going to have to look to resolve those issues above and beyond like the trying to make sure that the UX is a great experience for customers and readers. So just making sure that again that whole process is easy and a nice experience for them, that subconsciously that we're making it as easy for them to navigate and get the information that they're after or make a purchase in some cases. So we'll just dive into 7 UX tips now that you could probably go away and try and implement for yourself to hopefully have a better experience and improve performance moving forwards. People over robots, so that ultimately means catering to the end user rather than necessarily to search engines as the priority. We also have to think, what is the main purpose and goal of your site? So as an e-commerce store, it's to make sales. If it's a blog, it's to provide educational information to your readers. That's the main thing. At the end of the day, we have to bear that in mind and tie everything back to what that is we're doing. So again, like as the example here, if we're a blog or a cooking blog, like people might be looking for recipes and it's that engaging blog. People don't want to be treated like they're a robot. So making sure that we bear that in mind, that as it's just a basic principle, don't just, when somebody goes to a website, there'll be a pop-up, then another one in this corner, that they're just already frustrated before they even try to make the interaction that they were going for. The amount of times I've been on websites like that and then you're already clicking off that you don't want to continue that experience. So again, if you would put yourself in that perspective, yeah, you might have marketing goals that you're trying to push promotional product, you might be trying to get an email subscriber and all like those type of things, but there are different ways of achieving the same end goal. Put yourself in the position of the reader or customer, and would you enjoy that as an experience? And that's what you have to kind of bear in mind. It's a balancing act. Potentially an indicator that people aren't necessarily finding content as helpful or the experience isn't as good, like that there's ways to divulge and dig into that to be able to investigate to find out how things are working. Is again, just look at some of your Google Analytics information, like look at bounce rate information, and it might also be worth installing Hotjar and going through some of the setting up a recording for these pages, so then you can get an understanding of the experiences some users are going through, that you can then watch them back and see if they're tripping up or if there's some bits are giving them pain points. So you can obviously go through that as a opportunity to improve on things. And if we delve into this next bit now as the second point in terms around optimizing the content, obviously you've all heard the term that content is king. Ultimately, with a strong site, from authoritativeness along with a lot of content, you're probably going to have a strong keyword footprint. But again, there are obviously ways that we talk about being able to improve the actual content itself. If you just don't want to go to a blog post and it just be plastered with massive volumes of copy, like break it up, nice headlines so you can skim to the section you want, adding in images, backs it up, makes it much more easier. Obviously, remember, people learn in different ways, so it could be that an image provides them a lot more clarity than actually reading the text. Potentially even adding in a video might increase your time on site and engagement rates and things like that. We see that a little bit more of a practice these days happening as well. But again, just basic SEO kind of things around obviously just on-page elements to kind of make this as an easy layout. And again, you don't want to bury great information, like make it easy to navigate and only be like hopefully 2 clicks away from the homepage. So like home, blog, and then you're in the blog feed, something along those will help it easier to be crawled, to then ultimately making it as a user experience that the path to finding the content is very easy. Something we just alluded to there around, we're going to talk about now optimizing the navigation. More and more these days we're on our mobile phones, and we're obviously a little bit more conscious about not probably as spending on our phones as we are on desktop, but we're probably still looking to make the purchases, so we still need the experience to be seamless on desktop and mobile, so making it easy for people to find the information that they want. So from a user experience on mobile, that from a navigation perspective, it could be having a prominent search option to find the product so they don't have to go through all the menu options, but also then having probably a nice, easy to use navigation of categories to then subcategories that is very fluid and user friendly. Obviously, doing that as well makes it easier for, as we've alluded to, for search engines to crawl, having that kind of hierarchy in a mega menu style navigation setup. Again, passing authority as well, to then probably having a better impact on ranking performance. As we tie all this back into that's a much easier process for an end user to actually find the product that they want, whether that was literally to search for the product or go through, if they don't know what they want, to then just browse and go through a category to subcategory option. Jumping on to cleaning up the web design. Obviously, as a non-designer, talking specifically about design points, to take this with a pinch of salt, I can't obviously give you exact examples, but unfortunately, using the statement, make things pretty, or things to that kind of nature, you'll see it when you're looking at a site that you're going, actually, yeah, that they're doing things well, and you can then obviously take inspiration from them and work with a designer to input these and make it a reality for your own site. Again, when you review your own, you'll be able to see elements that you're probably not happy with, or sections, or it could even be the case that the whole theme or design of your site isn't up to scratch, and you're probably going to have to look to redevelop or install a new theme or something to that kind of nature. When I obviously alluded to the fact that I did this case study and wrote it out around the experience around my own site, this was from just iterations of testing ideas, and it's not something that just happened overnight. It's obviously I started with a design, and through bits of over periods of time I realized that actually certain bits weren't quite working or weren't resonating with people, that I swapped them out to then hopefully increase the effectiveness of the site from a user's perspective, that ultimately actually had a beneficial performance impact from a search engine and SEO perspective. Something that within this that I was able to do was the fact that what I initially thought that having contact forms from a service page at the bottom of each page would be great, when I actually dived into like the actual analytics, I could actually see that none of the actual leads that were of any decent quality, rather than just spammy sales stuff, came through the actual contact page. So with that in mind, obviously it was quite a bulky section to each of these service pages. I was able to strip that out and make it more of a click through, to direct the call to action through to the contact page for people to actually make and get in touch with me there. Again, with that, I was then able to update that page to have a lot more trust elements to hopefully increase the conversion rate of that page, which it ended up doing as well. With all that in mind, it was a case of improving the user flow that actually had that uptick in performance. We want to consider obviously improving your site speed. You've heard all those things of like Amazon talking about that anything past a 2-second load time, I think it was something like every 1 millisecond past that, they lose like 100,000 in revenue. Like there's some crazy statistics out there around that. And again, I'm not saying you as a smaller site has the same impact, but again, just personally, you know that when you go to a website, it takes ages to log, your mind just wanders, and then you go, I'll go and do something else, I'll go on another website. Like you probably just lost their engagement that they were going to potentially do something with you, or whatever that action was. That it's just a ballpark benchmark. If you're loading below 3 seconds, I would say you're in an okay position. Like there will be a point where you get diminishing returns below that, and I've worked with clients in the past that are like so focused on that we need our site to perform really, really quickly and getting it loading in, let's say, half a second, that all these really nice images that they did have on their site are all blurred because they've reduced the quality of them that much that they obviously don't look good. Yes, you might be loading quick, but you're probably not going to get any conversion from it because the site doesn't look great. So that's why it's all a case of a balancing factor and taking all these things into account and making the adjustments where needs be. That obviously we don't want to go all in on just optimization and then ruin the design elements that we're having to compromise on that side. Like it's a combination of more all coming together, and that's how they all overlap to then increasing the hopefully conversion rate and then the performance of the actual site as well. I don't know if you're like using like a hosted website, whether that's something like a Wix, Squarespace, could be like an e-com version, so like Shopify or BigCommerce. Like they take care of the obviously site speed from a server performance, but just obviously making sure that you don't upload like a 10 megabyte image. Like do compress it enough that it looks well enough. But then if you have a bit more control under that, and you're, for argument's sake, using a self-hosted WordPress site, you've got a VPS, make sure you're obviously leveraging a caching plugin, compress your JavaScript and CSS files, and then look to, for argument's sake, it's server level. You could look to enable something like Varnish to improve obviously just the server performance in itself. There's obviously lots of things that you can look to do. And again, like you go page by page, look at the unnecessary scripts that don't need loading on that page, because I know, for argument's sake, like contact form 7, that loads on every page, and that's just an extra HTTP request. You could obviously look to not call that on every page, only on the contact page. Are you leveraging HTTP 2? Obviously, I know HTTP 3 is coming into play. Just make sure that's enabled at server level as well, and that will mean that you can load multiple HTTP requests at once, rather than having to do them singularly and slow things down. So there's lots of things you can do and look up on the site speed performance side of things. Obviously, we're talking here around creating a clear user path. Obviously, the more you understand your users, the more data you've got around this, the easier you can do it. Again, just working with a UX designer, they will have a better understanding of natural workflows and how these kind of things come together. Obviously, within e-commerce itself, these things are a little bit more standardized, that people understand that obviously it'll be probably like homepage, category page, e-com page, then it will be like cart, and then checkout process. That's kind of pretty similar. Obviously, there'll be a few different entry points throughout that, but pretty similar and standardized like layout and designs across the board there. Obviously, if it's more blog and things like that, as I've alluded to, I obviously just tweak these with time on my personal site once I got more data and was able to hopefully improve and optimize this. Always bringing it back down to what's the main KPI, what we actually measuring the performance of the site on. For me, that's obviously leads on my personal site or on an e-commerce sale. So you can always bring it back to that, and that's the goal. And one of the great ways of finding out UX issues, we launched an e-com site as a small project site. One of the first things that we did is we added live chat on there. It's amazing how many like little reports that you can get sent through of oh, I couldn't find this, or oh, I've got this question. If you go and add live chat, you'll be amazed at all these kind of questions that come through, that if you then make a note of them and then go and address all those points throughout the website, you'll only be making the user experience a lot better by addressing their concerns or problems up front. It answers them, that then means they might be able to have a higher chance of converting. So again, that's just a great tip of like just enabling live chat to be able to collect this great, basically user testing information without obviously having to pay for it. When we talk about making it mobile friendly, as the statistic here saying, like, again, 30% of all online commerce sales in the US are done on mobile. So a great thing is just when obviously the site loads, that above the fold, obviously what you just see when the site actually loads is that there is all the main information there, that it's clear that you've got price, you've got the add to cart or buy now button, the title, it's all really clear to be able to make the experience there. Like, again, if you go through this process and think, if I was a customer, what information would I want to know? So for argument's sake, on an e-com site, it's a case of how long does it take for the product to arrive? How long is it going to be shipped straight away? What's the returns policy like? Is the product even in stock? Obviously, how much does it cost? These are all the questions that you have to go through. Do I trust the company? Is there any reviews around there to like believe that they're obviously credible and I'd want to spend and part my money with them? So obviously these are all great ways of going through this, and again, make sure for obviously mobile, it's ultimately overtaking people's lives. Everybody has now these personal computers in their pockets, walking around with them at all times. That it means that you've obviously got a much higher chance now of making more sales or generating leads these days. With that in mind, obviously do a lot of testing of your site, look at it on multiple devices, look at it on desktop, make sure it looks and performs exactly the same from an experience perspective, that it's got all the elements there that are needed on both devices. It's very fluid and adapts with the responsive design as it scales accordingly. Obviously you can go through and test your site in the Google mobile friendly testing tool. It'll probably, most of these days, if it's a responsive site, it will just pass. It's more a case of just, like you say, using your time and energy to investigate a little bit further to make those minor improvements over time. This isn't something that will happen overnight. This will be just iterations of things, because it's not something you know all the answers to. You obviously get this information and data over time to then obviously improve it, but that's when it comes together, that you've got SEO and UX kind of coming hand in hand to help improve your performance, and that's performance in from an organic perspective as well as probably from a lead and a sales perspective. Obviously you'll be able to see that in your conversion rates and in your sales performance, but again, there are obviously indirect KPI metrics that we can use that we've already mentioned about. Making sure that the intent of the page is what the search term people are looking for, like the amount of times we've seen that the actual content on the page doesn't match up that of what the search query is, that as soon as that align, you get the performance, then it push up from just readapting the page. But obviously go through all those, look over your site, look at it from those different eyes, and think of it obviously when you go to a website, like what things go through your head. You put yourself in a different perspective when you're obviously viewing things as a customer. And again, from an e-com perspective, when you're parting with hard-earned money, that you want to make sure that you can do the same for your own site. So hopefully that's good, and obviously if you've got any questions, you're more than happy to put them in the comment section below, and we'll do our best to answer them. Hopefully you found this helpful. Do hit the like and subscribe button, and if you do fancy working with us or got any more like detailed questions, obviously our contact information is on the slide, and you're more than happy to get in touch with us.